Yeah, yeah.
How you doing, Steve?
I'm good, Eric. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for doing this. So, I've been chasing you for a while trying to do this meeting, and your schedule is just so busy that, it's hard to do, but here it is.
Yeah, that's IT. It's just the way it is.
Yeah. So, let's cut to the chase. How did it all start for you? Like, how did you get into the shooting sports?
Well, when I was a little boy, I went to summer camp in New Hampshire for 5 years, and they gave us small bore position training.
Mhm.
So we learned sitting, kneeling, standing with small bore rifles, with Winchester 52s, and I didn't really do anything for a number of years. I didn't really pay attention to it.
Mhm.
In the early 80s, I started getting very interested in shooting, buying some guns. And then I discovered that you could actually shoot at Camp Pendleton, if you were a member of Santa Margarita Gun Club. And so I started shooting up at Pendleton at 600 and 1,000 yards.
Mhm.
Um, I was shooting service rifle to begin, certainly not at 1,000. That was a Springfield M1A national match, and had a lot of fun. Built a 300 Win Mag match rifle,
Mhm.
and paid dearly in bruises with that thing for quite a while. Um, and But then I went to work for Barrett Firearms, moved to Tennessee for a
Mhm.
couple of years, and I was shooting 50s all the time.
Mhm.
There's actually a good range, Tullahoma, down not too far south of us,
Mhm.
but I just didn't. If you're shooting thousands of rounds of 50 a year, it's not the idea of putting a rifle against your shoulder for fun is not a good idea.
So how does this come about? How do you go? What were you doing before you started working for Barrett?
Well, I had a reloading business for a while, custom reloading business. And I was making a few bucks. It wasn't a big deal.
Mhm.
Primarily people going on hunting trips or just too lazy to learn how to reload, but wanted better performance. Back in those days, factory ammo gave you very good velocity because they had uh, tailored powders. Their
Okay.
powders were blended specifically for a load, but the accuracy wasn't very good. If you were getting minute and a half from factory ammo, you were delighted. So a lot of people wanted better precision and were willing to pay for it.
Uh-huh.
So I transitioned from that. I had done some load development on a very powerful rifle, a Weatherby rifle
Uh-huh.
for a guy, and it just beat the crap out of me. It was really unpleasant. It was a light rifle. He wanted heavy bullets for medium game,
Mhm.
and it just tore me up. So I started looking into muzzle brakes,
Mhm.
and I eventually patented a muzzle brake for military small arms,
Wow.
and made those for a few years, and eventually, came across Barrett and bought number 117 of the original model 82, not the 82A1, but the 82.
Mhm.
And at that time, I think that was the first one he sold,
Okay.
and it had a lot of problems. So I wrote up a long letter and sent it back to him, and they made a bunch of changes. He was very receptive.
Mhm.
Ronnie's pretty bright guy, and sent back the improved model, and that still had a variety of issues.
Mhm.
I wrote up a long letter and sent it back to him, And after a few exchanges like that, it was improving pretty dramatically.
Hmm.
And we'd had a number of phone conversations, and he suggested I might want to come and work for him.
Okay.
So we talked about that for a while, and eventually, and my wife, who's a San Diego gal, she wasn't thrilled about the idea, but she
Hmm.
went along with it, and we moved to Central Tennessee for a couple of years.
Okay. So, what were you doing at Barrett? Were you part of
Vice
design?
President Marketing.
Oh, you were marketing.
Yeah, yeah. But marketing in small arms is not, it's not Madison Avenue marketing. When you go out in the field with these guys, they ask some pretty detailed questions
Uh-huh.
because they're all military folks.
Right.
And if you don't have the answers, they're not going to listen to anything you say. So you need to send technically knowledgeable people
Hmm.
out to the field. And I ended up doing demos in, I don't know, 12 countries, something like that. Visited some countries several times. Um, these were primarily third world countries with serious internal problems,
Hmm.
or else they wouldn't have been interested.
Right.
Uh, and some of them wanted to use them for the right reasons. Others, like the Norwegians, they were very sharp, very professional. NATO country, they know
Hmm.
what they're doing. They wanted to use them against Soviet helicopters that were coming into land. They could nail them in the landing zones.
Mm.
Very good use, because that could be given to the home guard who were close to any probable areas that the Soviets might use.
Hmm.
Um, Other countries wanted to use them for sniper rifles against humans for all the wrong reasons, because they just weren't very good, and they thought that if they got a really big rifle, that somehow they'd be better. Um, and the short answer is that doesn't work.
Right.
Um, but yeah, so that was very interesting. Learned a great deal about what was going on in other countries and what they wanted to do with 50s. So
Uh-huh.
eventually, I left Barrett because they had a guy who had obtained control of the company, and he and I didn't get along very well. So, and my wife was she was done with Tennessee. She wanted to go back to California. So
Hmm.
we went back to San Diego, where in concert with a couple of other folks who funded it, I designed and built a gas operated caliber 50 rifle.
Okay.
And unfortunately, it never got past the prototype stage because the recession of the early 90s hit, and the company just went out of business. They
Mm.
they couldn't get continued funding, and they just shut it down.
Right.
So that was unfortunate. But it had incorporated a number of things that I'd learned from customers about what they wanted, and were not feasible in the Barrett design because
Hmm.
of its operating mechanism.
I see. When you said you were doing demos, what were you actually doing? Like, I mean, I assume it had to be long range stuff.
Oh,
Otherwise,
sure. Well, because we advertised 1,600 meters was the effective range of the rifle. That's a mile.
hmm,
Um, of course, they all wanted to
yeah,
see
they
it
want to
shot at
see.
1,600 meters.
Yeah.
And I did a lot of shooting at a mile.
Hmm.
When we were in Oman, we were out north of Salalah, which is down on the Indian Ocean,
Hmm.
at the Sultan Special Forces camp. And the colonel said to me, he said, can you see that Land Rover out there? So I looked through the binoculars, and I see it. I hit it with a laser rangefinder. We had a Simrad Optronics laser rangefinder, and it was 1580, something like that. It was right at 1,600 meters.
Hmm.
And he said, "Do you think you can hit it?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I think I can hit it. I said, where's the gas tank? And he said, well, it's behind the seats. What difference does that make? So we were shooting armor piercing incendiary, so
Mm-hmm.
we could see the flash, when it hit.
Right.
I hit it a couple times and behind the seat, and after the second shot, I saw that there was liquid leaking out of the vehicle. I hit it the third time and actually lit off one of the APIs,
Mm-hmm.
and the vehicle just started burning real nicely. Set the tires on fire and everything. And the colonel said, well, you weren't supposed to set it on fire. And I said, well, you shouldn't have told me where the gas tank was. And the other guys, these were all, SAS guys. They were very relaxed. And the other guys were all laughing like hell because the colonel was irritated. His target vehicle had got set on fire.
Well, I mean that has to be good for business though. When
Yep,
you say, look,
yep,
this thing can do that.
yep. Yeah, at that time, they were having a lot of problems because North Yemen, the two Yemens were not combined at that time. It was North and South Yemen.
Mm-hmm.
And North Yemen was a communist country, and they were causing Oman a lot of problems on their border, smuggling of narcotics, all kinds of irritants.
Uh-huh.
And so that's what they wanted to do, was engage vehicles out in the desert at extended range.
I see. How many offered you a job of those that you were demonstrating for? I assume.
Well, they didn't offer me a job. I mean, I obviously had one, but there were a number of them that were quite impressed. Generally speaking, they weren't accustomed to shooting at very long range,
Mm-hmm.
and so they considered it somewhat miraculous that you could
Yeah,
actually,
that's my point. I figure when you're showing them something that they probably didn't even think could be done, right?
right.
So they're like, well, yeah, we can buy the rifle. It's kind of the Quigley Down Under thing, right? If I had that rifle, I could do that. But I'm sure they figured
Yeah,
out pretty
well,
quick. It took some good trigger puller.
Well, I trained them, while I was there demonstrating. These were usually over the course of several days,
Okay.
and so I'd get them down behind the rifle and I'd coach them on it. And the scope, which was a Leopold M3 Ultra 10x, had a Christmas tree reticle that I designed,
Mm-hmm.
and it went out to 1,600 meters. So we were shooting known distance. I mean, we knew the distance to the targets, and I told them, hold at 1450, hold between 14 and 1500, and pull the trigger.
Send it.
And yeah, and they were hitting things, and they were very impressed. After I left Barrett, they completed a number of those sales. Military sales generally are kind of slow. They take a long time to percolate through the system and actually produce money.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, a lot of them were very pleased with it.
Good. Good. So you leave Barrett. You try to develop your own. That doesn't pan out. Where do you go from there?
Well, by that time, my wife was sick of me being out of the country, for several months a year. We had children, and she was pretty irritated with the whole thing. So she divorced me. She got rid of me, which was, not. It's never a good thing. You've been there, and it's not fun.
Right.
Um, so I was kind of sick of the whole thing, and I just started doing general design work, using CAD systems,
Mm-hmm.
and that quickly moved into a very lucrative proposition. I mean, by the late 90s, using Pro Engineer, I was making, 150K
Wow, that's
doing
really good
design
money, and
consulting, which back then was good money.
it's good money now. It's really good money then.
Yeah, it was. And I said, well, I'm just going to ride this mare till she comes up lame. And I got a consulting job, a contract job with General Atomics,
Mm-hmm.
doing design work. They really liked my work. I spent 8 years there as a contractor
Wow.
until finally, I'd been helping more and more on the IT side because of their IT structure at the time was decentralized and not very well organized. And they needed a lot of help in the engineering groups. And so more and more of my time was helping my fellow designers with their systems.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually they made me an offer, to work as a systems administrator. They
Okay.
matched what I was making as a contractor.
Mm-hmm.
And so I became a GA employee in IT for another 8 years.
Okay. Okay. Let me stop you there, because I mean, I know all this happened, but I'm having a hard time understanding or actually connecting the dots as to how do you learn all this stuff? Is that what you went to school for? Like, I mean, this is drastically different fields that you've been
Yeah,
excelling at.
I've had several careers. It's true.
Well, yeah, but like, okay, so from design to IT, how I mean, I can design stuff, maybe not as good as you, but I can't. If the printer goes down, I'm done. But how do you get this knowledge? I guess is what I'm asking.
So, I was in the Navy back in the 70s, and they sent me to school for a year to learn the computer systems on Spruance class destroyers.
Okay.
And then, in their infinite wisdom, the Navy sent me to a World War II destroyer in San Diego that had vacuum tubes.
Okay.
So, but that's the Navy way.
Hmm.
The military does very strange things sometimes. They'll spend several $100,000 educating someone and then send them to a place where they can't possibly use that knowledge.
Yeah.
But,
Why not?
yeah. So, but they taught me a lot, both in school about computer systems, serial data systems, and on the job on the destroyer. I was a tin can sailor, so I was on a little bitty destroyer, San Diego. The practical work of working on electromechanical systems, because that's what we had. They were electromechanical,
Okay.
not electronic.
Okay.
And so I gained a great deal of experience in the Navy about how mechanisms work, and I'd always been a car guy, so I understood a fair bit about how mechanisms operate.
Mm-hmm.
And when I started trying to design my own firearm, that was all self-taught. I just simply acquired as many books as I could lay my hands on and read them.
Ah, okay.
And so that transitioned into more general design work. Um, and most of that started with mechanisms, but I learned a good deal from working on different projects about other areas of design. And I wanted to increase my attractiveness as a contract employee, so I kept educating myself more and more.
Mm-hmm.
I always made sure I had a much more powerful machine than my employers had, so I could do things that they could not do. And they thought that was kind of amazing too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, as you noted about the Barrett, they tend to associate that with the person, not with the system.
Right.
And while I was an adept operator, I had a very fast machine with a lot of memory,
Hmm.
but they tended to place that on me. And
Well, part part of it was on you because you were the one smart enough to realize that you needed a very powerful machine. You know what I mean?
well, yeah, I mean, it's not like I didn't like having one. It's kind of like, the guy that buys a Porsche, right? He
Yeah.
he wants to go fast.
Right.
Um, and yeah, when you're doing design work on a computer, any delay is very disruptive. If you execute an operation and you have to wait, say, 10 seconds for it to complete, it's very easy for your attention to drift. Start thinking about something else. Did I pay that bill? Whatever. Um, and so if you have things happen very quickly, pretty much as soon as you click and make it happen, um, it it contributes a great deal to efficiency. And so having a faster machine it's good in a lot of different ways. And when I transitioned to IT at GA, that's something I did. I made sure that all the engineering guys doing design work had the fastest machines they would let me buy.
Hmm.
And sometimes they complained a good bit about the cost of these systems. But if you look at the cost of the machine, let's say I was buying a $10,000 machine for an engineer.
Hmm.
That engineer is costing them a fully burdened rate of 160,000 a year, something like that at the time. That's
Hmm.
including, the benefits and all that, the
Right.
fully
Right.
burdened rate. And the machine has a minimum lifespan of 2 years as a fast system.
Right.
So that's $5,000 a year. And if you can increase that engineer's efficiency by 10% over those two
Yeah, that's
years,
$16,000.
yeah, yeah, the 10K
Yeah.
is trivia.
Right.
It's a no-brainer. But that's not the way people think. They look at it and they say, well, we can buy these PCs for $3,000. What do they need $10,000 machines for? Well, yeah,
I
they're
had
not
a
they're not they're not doing Word documents. They're operating they're
right
operating very sophisticated software.
heavy graphics. I had a video editor at one point that I hired, and the I had it had a we had a good system, but it wasn't top of the line. The point is, when he would render videos or export them, it take some of these videos were, I don't know, 30 minutes long, 20 minutes long, and it'd be about 2x. So if it was a 20-minute video, it'd take about 40 minutes. So for 40 minutes, he couldn't really do anything because he didn't want to
Yeah.
tax the system anymore. So he just sit around, do nothing, or walk around. And one day I was walking around and I saw him. I said, "What are you doing?" He goes, "I'm exporting a video." And I'm like, "Okay." And then I went and did whatever I had to do, come back, and he's still wandering around. I'm like, "What are you doing?" He goes, "Still exporting." I went and built a very very heavy duty system. Very
Hmm.
fast processor, as much RAM as we could put in the motherboard, everything. And that
Yep.
turned to where that 20-minute video could be exported in about 3 minutes.
Yep.
And yeah, now he was busy. He was always so. Yeah, I mean, I saw it firsthand because it was so drastic. Had it not been that drastic, I probably would have ignored it. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
But it was very drastic. But that day, from there on, I mean, I have very very fast systems because they pay off.
Well, in those days, I used to look forward to going to work because operating the pro engineer on a very fast system was like driving a fast sports car. I could manipulate those 3D images and zoom in, zoom out, move around the system easily. It it
Right.
it responded instantly to what I wanted. And I'd see other guys, they'd change their uh, viewpoint, and it would take 2 to 3 seconds for the
Yeah, to
for
catch
the
up.
images to re-render.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that just kills your productivity.
Yeah, drastically. So now you're working. Uh, what are you? The IT? What's your
Well, they
new?
eventually promoted me to IT manager of the division. That was actually a mistake because I was they paid me a lot. They threw a lot of money at me, but it as a level four manager, I was opened up to a lot of politics.
Mm,
I don't do well with politics. I have little patience for it, and I tend to tell people what I think of them when they pull that crap, and they don't like hearing that.
mm,
Um, they actively discouraged me from doing any technical work. They said that wasn't my job.
mm-hmm.
That's what I enjoyed doing. That,
Mm-hmm.
that was what I liked, and that's what eventually caused me to leave GA
Uh-huh.
in 2011. I quit because I just didn't want to do that anymore. But prior to that, as you know, I had started shooting again.
Right.
I woke up one morning around 2007, I guess it was, and I realized, wow, I've got a lot of money in the bank, and I make very good money. I could build a really nice rifle. And so I looked around and I saw that um, there was this new discipline in NRA high power. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't just sling anymore, sling or service rifle anymore. And that's the first I actually ran across F class.
Okay.
But when I decided to start shooting again, I started going to various sites and I ran across this F class. Whoa, this looks interesting. They
Uh-huh.
use big scopes. They shoot at long range. Yeah, this sounds good. I like this.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so I built a rifle and using a Savage. As you know, a lot of people start that way.
Mm-hmm.
And because I was familiar with the cartridge, it was a 308, and I started shooting. And quickly realized there were a number of things I didn't like about this rifle. So I had a new trigger put on it. I had some work done on it. I changed the stock. I got a different bipod. I put a rail in the fore end. I was changing all kinds of things on it. And you saw that rifle when we first met
Right.
over at Phoenix. And I'd gotten it shooting pretty well. I was shooting Berger 210 long range boat tails,
Mm-hmm.
and they shot really well. That rifle did quite well. If I hadn't have kept cross firing, I would have I would have won that first match we shot
Yeah, well, you would
together.
have done well. The crossfires kind of put a hurt
Yeah,
in your score.
that's not a good idea.
Right.
Uh, so I remember people telling me over there in Phoenix, typical talk at the line. What are you shooting? Well, I'm shooting Berger 210s. Whoa, that's way too heavy for 308. And why would that be? Well, what kind of muzzle velocity are you getting? Well, 2480. Oh, that's way too slow. Yeah, why is that? Uh, and then they saw my targets and they realized, oh, well, it actually seems to work.
Isn't it amazing how things that are not feasible, not a good idea, all of a sudden become the norm, and then everybody's doing it. You know what I mean? Like the heavy bullets. Because
Yeah.
back then, I believe everybody was shooting 155s in the 308 or similar.
Or even worse, 168s.
Yeah.
Um,
Uh, and you're coming around with 210s, and that's why people are raising their eyebrows, going, what's going on with this guy? He obviously doesn't know what he's doing. But you had knowledge that, and this is the thing about, just because you're new to the game doesn't mean you're new. Doesn't mean you come in with no
right.
knowledge whatsoever, right? So you had this prior knowledge that, you know, heavy bullets do better,
Oh yeah.
even though they're slower.
Well, my 300 Win Mag, I started out shooting 220 Match Kings, the ancient Sierra 220 Match King. And given that I didn't want to have shoulder surgery anytime soon, I stopped using those
Uh-huh.
and switched to 190s, which were a lot easier on the shoulder. Um, and I could drive those at a pretty good clip. They did pretty well at 1,000.
Right. Right. So you know, you're obviously shooting FTR. You're changing everything on this rifle. Uh, you eventually moved to F open. What made you change to F open?
So I shot with you, and who was the guy you shot with?
Tony. Tony.
Tony, and he had a Manners F class stock,
Mm-hmm.
and I asked him about that stock, and he was telling me about it, and I said, "Really? It's 100% carbon fiber. There's no foam." And he said, "Yep, that's how they build it." And I was kind of, I mean, that's rather lavish use of carbon fiber. And at General Atomics, of course, we built aircraft out of carbon fiber. I was very familiar with how it's used,
Mm-hmm.
and so I started looking into that, and I put I started putting the plans together to build a 284 Shaheen
Mm-hmm.
in a Manners F class stock. You had been shooting a Shaheen, and I was very impressed with the performance of your rifle. I'd also, by then I had a Viper SS in a Shaheen ST1000 stock, chambered in 6BR,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd been shooting that in mid-range matches up at Pendleton, and winning a number of them. It's still a very accurate little rifle. Um, I got Manners to put a BAT 3LL action in one of their stocks, and the stock took, I don't know, 11 months or something for them to get it out the door.
Oh, that's back
Um,
when the lead times were short.
yeah, that's right. Before they got absurd. The second one, which I'm sure we'll discuss, that took 14 months. They were working up to their present 2-year backlog.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I got that Shaheen put together and started shooting it, and that was just a revelation. That was absolutely wonderful. I mean, I discovered what I really wanted, a rifle that could shoot extremely well at long range.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so started competing in F Open, and dropped the FTR altogether.
You know that I still shoot the Shaheen. You know,
Oh yeah,
I
sure.
played around with some others, and it just what Norm would call it. It's the master race. You know, it's
Yeah,
that Shaheen just works. It
yes, it
just
does.
works. You
Yep.
know.
There's only one cartridge I've found more forgiving and tolerant than the Shaheen, and that's the 300 WSM.
So what? Let's talk about the 300 because I'm gonna, you know, I always refer to you as the godfathers of the 300 WSM because you started. Uh, when did you start playing around with the 300 WSM?
Well, Berger came out with this new bullet. This was probably right around 2011, I think. Um, they came out with this new bullet, a 230 grain hybrid.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at the BC of that, which was very high. And I calculated in, a 4 or 5% increase with pointing and trimming. And that was eyebrow raising. I said, "Whoa, that's pretty impressive." So I looked at what cartridges might be suitable for that. The first thing I looked at was a 300 Winchester Magnum because I was familiar with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I discarded that. It had too much powder capacity. So the bench rest guys were shooting 300 WSM, had been for a while, typically with lighter bullets than that,
Mm-hmm.
but they'd been shooting it. So I put that together. Again, took 14 months to get Manners to make a stock for me. Used another 3LL, BAT 3LL action, and decided I wanted as much weight in this rifle as I could possibly get. So I did a few calculations and I figured if I use a 34-inch barrel instead of a 32-inch barrel, I can run this thing right up to 21 pounds, 14 ounces.
Wow.
Just
2 ounces
shy.
Yeah.
And the only reason I could get away with a barrel that long is because of the Manners stock.
The carbon fiber.
It has an extremely long, very stiff forend, because otherwise the rifle would have been nose heavy. The back end would have been too light.
Mm-hmm.
But as it was, it worked just right. I initially started out with IMR 7828 SSC.
Going for that speed, huh?
Well, I was getting 2950 out of that 34-inch barrel.
With 230s?
With 230s.
Wow.
And I couldn't manage it. It wasn't a recoil problem directly. I mean, it wasn't hurting me or anything like that. After all, I'd fired 7,000 rounds or so through caliber 50 rifles. I'm not recoil shy, but I couldn't manage it on the bags. So I went out to Pendleton for a club match one day, and on the second string, I thought, I'm going to do everything I can to focus on the rifle and its handling and do everything I can to keep it on the bags.
Mm-hmm.
And on that string, I shot a 195 11X
mm-hmm.
at 1,000. All 5 9s were up and to the right.
Okay.
In pretty much the same place.
Okay.
So you don't shoot 11Xs at 1,000 yards if your load isn't working.
Correct.
Clearly. And I obviously couldn't control the rifle. So I started looking at, well, what can I do? I need to slow it down. What can I do? And I had a whole bunch of 4831 shortcut because that's what I used in the Shaheen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, the Nationals and Worlds were coming up pretty rapidly. They were only about 3 months away at that time. So I developed a load using shortcut, and it came up at around 2865.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just enough. It was still a handful. It would still move the rear bag around. And this is a 16-pound rear bag. It would still move it around. I still had to pay very close attention to body position, tension on the front rest bag had to be very heavy. All kinds of things that you had to pay attention to. Unlike the Shaheen, which required virtually zero attention.
Right.
With the Shaheen, you put a cartridge in it, you push it forward, you close the bolt, you pull the trigger. That's the attention you need to pay to it. That's all it ever did.
Right.
Not so with the 300. It moved around a lot on the rest. So I developed this load, and I went out to South Bay Rod and Gun Club here in San Diego, which has a 300-yard range. That's where I do load development.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's very short on time, to go on to Raton. So I needed a 0, and there were no upcoming matches. So I put some reduced targets out at 300, and I shot a 216X and a 217X at 300 yards with it. And I said, well, it seems to be shooting.
Yeah.
So I went to Raton for the national championships and the worlds with a load that had never been shot in a match and never been shot past 300 yards.
Why not, right?
Hey, what the hell, it's just a couple $1,000s in, in travel and hotels, and it's just the world championship. And
Yeah,
yeah, what did I care? So, yeah, and as you know, it performed admirably.
right. Well, if you remember, I also brought a 300 WSM to the World
Yep,
Championship because
that's
of
right.
you, uh, and it was working very well. But I ultimately gave it up because of the same, like you said, the Shihane. You shoot, you push forward, you load around, you look at the
Yeah,
conditions,
that's it.
whatever. You close the bolt and you send it. The
Yeah,
300, the recoil, it torques so much that it'll kick
yeah,
the bag over. I mean, there was time. It was just very inconsistent. I spent a lot of time working on it, and there were some times where I could really shoot it well, but
mm-hmm,
you just could never. You had to always be mindful of the bags because
yeah,
the Shihane, you shoot it, you push it forward, you're on target. It's pretty safe to assume that's your target. The 300, sometimes you shoot, you push it forward, it'd be on target. Most of the time, it was on your neighbor's target. So if you pull the
yeah.
trigger, that's a crossfire, and they would scare me to death.
Oh, yeah,
So it was always I always had to break my concentration because shoot it, look at the target, wrong target, move it over. I still do that with a Shihane. I push it forward, I look at the target, make sure it's my target, but
right.
it's quick. When it's
Yes,
always your target, there's nothing to be done other than just acknowledge it and
right.
move on. 300 up, not my target. Move it over, move the bag, move the rest. It was just hard to shoot the 300.
And that time that you spend futzing with the rifle is time that you do not spend looking at the conditions, the flags, the mirage, and it slows down your ability to exploit conditions.
Well, yeah, the time that I was spent messing with the readjusting my setup, it was time that my competitors, my competition, my neighbors on my neighboring target, they spend that time punching X's, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
So that's what ultimately made me go back to the Shihane and
Well,
live happily ever after.
when we were shooting the nationals up there at Raton, I think it was the fourth match. It was the first match in the morning. It was a 15 shot match at 1,000. I was on position one and you were on position two.
Okay.
And there was very, very little wind that morning.
Mm-hmm.
And, but enough to, to push you off if you didn't pay very close attention. So I shot an X, a 10, couple of X's, 10. So in the first 9, I dropped 4. 4 X's. That is, I was still clean,
Uh-huh.
but I'd shot 4 10s. Then I saw that the flags just dropped to nothing. I mean, they just went dead.
Mm-hmm.
And I shot holding dead center, which, as you know, is relatively rare,
Mm-hmm.
dead center, and shot a dead center X. Looked at the flags. As soon as that target came back up, I put another one in the same place
Mm-hmm.
and shot 6 in a row,
Okay.
just as fast as I could possibly pull the trigger. And then I was done. The guy that was scoring for me was, you know him. He's a past president of TSRA.
I don't know.
He's
I'm sure I know him. I'm sure I know
an
him,
older
but
guy.
right.
Yeah, he was scoring for me,
Uh-huh.
and yeah, he was just shocked, and I said, well, the conditions were zero. I mean, there was
Was it
literally
John?
nothing.
Was it John?
Yes, yes,
Oh,
yeah,
what's his last name? Anyway, John.
yeah,
Uh, yeah. I mean, that 300 was great, but that Shihane is you can just shoot it
yeah,
fast. You can shoot it slow, and uh, I mean, the 300s have come a long way now. There's a lot of shooters on the line with 300s nowadays.
Oh yeah,
And,
but I've noticed not 230s.
right, yes, the 215s is kind of
Yep,
where they limit out, and I guess that's a happy balance that they found uh,
right.
with the 300. It gives some relatively good ballistics with not as bad recoil.
So when I was looking at the 300 using 230s, I looked at the 215s. The problem is if you drive them at any reasonable velocity, that is, you're not beating up your brass too bad and so on, you're no better off. You're slightly better off than the Shaheen. I
Right.
mean, I was shooting 180s at 2940 in the Shaheen. And yeah, the only way you could beat that by a perceptible margin was to shoot 230s. And that brings in a whole
Yeah.
raft of problems.
So
Um,
so there was this match, 600-yard match that you shot after the World Championship. Tell me about that match. That's a memorable match.
so yeah, I came back to San Diego, and I'd shot fifth in the nationals that year, and as you know, I got a real bad relay in the worlds, and ended up 29th. That
Hmm.
only took a couple points to be down that far.
Yeah.
Yeah, I shot right next to Gary Costello in
Oh,
that relay.
he mentioned that. He mentioned your trigger issue. Did you have a trigger issue back then?
It was the bolt.
Okay. What happened?
So, well, that relay was horrible. The storm was coming and wind was blowing, and those effing cinders were getting in my action. And at some point, I went to close the bolt, and I couldn't even get the bolt home all the way. I mean, it was grinding. Ah, crap. So I pulled the bolt out, and I had nothing to deal with it at the line. So I took the bolt and ran back to the truck. As I got up and started to move back to the truck, I looked over at Gary, and he was looking at me like I was crazy. Uh, and I went back to the truck, took the bolt apart, which on a bat is real easy to do. You don't need a tool.
Hmm.
Took it apart, wiped everything out, forced a rag up inside the bolt body, got it all cleaned out, re-lubricated the lugs, and went back to the line. So that took about 5 minutes. Went back to the line, put it back in the rifle, and the trigger didn't work. So the trigger got some crap in there too. So I just worked the bolt a few times, and was banging on the trigger and trying to get it to come loose, and whatever was in there fell out, and now it was working. So I looked at the flags, looked at the Mirage. It looked about the same as when I left. Still pretty crappy, and so I just at that point it's a sighter. So I
Yeah.
just held the same as I had been and shot a 10 on the right. And okay, well, fine. I know where I am,
Right.
and continued shooting. Um, I think Gary was amazed that I was able to complete the string in reasonable order and not drop a whole bunch of points. But really, the bottom line is not much had changed. It was still doing the same nasty stuff it had been before I left.
Well,
Uh,
that's probably where the amusement comes in, right? That it was nasty, and you figured, well, it's just the same level of nasty, so that should be the same hold,
yeah,
right? And it just worked out. Uh,
I think he was very impressed at that point with. See, that's the kind of situation where the 230s and the 300 really came into its own. Um, I'm convinced I would have lost more points if I was shooting a lighter caliber. And he was pretty impressed with that. He and I subsequently had a number of conversations about the 300 WSM and 230s.
He shoots one now, I'm pretty sure.
Hmm.
Yeah, Gary. Like I said, you pioneered the 300 in F class, and you did very well with it. And a lot of people, I give you credit every time I see somebody on the line with the 300, because you were the one out there taking the beating, and not only were you out there taking the beating and learning about it, you were actually offering your knowledge on accurate shooter, which is uh, where you'd put all your information out and share it, and people, take it or leave it, right?
Sure.
So it's not the fact that you simply started using it; it's that you started sharing your knowledge and your shortcomings, and your the things that were working and how you were fixing them and all that good stuff. That a lot of people, when they come to a 300, if they do any searching, of course, accurate shooters a forum where people kind of gravitate towards when they want to shoot F class or any type of competition. And there's Stephen Blair, with his 300, offering his knowledge, and because you don't make it sound like it, but you spent a considerable amount of effort getting that thing to
Oh,
work.
yeah. Greg Taylor will tell you he shot with me and scored for me in a number of matches up at Pendleton during that period. And when I was shooting that 78-28 load, he said the first time he saw it, he was shocked because my body was moving back about 6 inches when I pulled the trigger. And he said that he could see this shock wave go through my body even down to my feet. Um, it was very frustrating. Um, even with the shortcut load, even with 48-31, I had to exploit every trick I possibly could. I mean, if you saw the tension I put on that front bag, you'd say, well, that can't work. It's going to pull the front bag out of the ground. And if I hadn't had spikes on my feet, which I drove into the ground, it probably would have.
Right. Yeah, it's so anyway, you go through the world championship, you finish 29th, which is not a bad
Yeah.
finish. I mean,
No, but I should have been in. I think I should have been in the top 10. But
well, I
oh
think
well.
everybody there thinks that.
Yeah. Um, if
So,
I'd shot as well in the worlds as I did in the nationals, I would have been.
okay, let's touch on that, because this is one thing that I've always noticed about F class is it's very hard to be consistently at the top. You know what I mean? Like like Larry Bartholomew, right? Perfect
Yep.
example. 23. He won the 2013 Nationals,
Hmm.
and I don't remember how he did at the Worlds. I mean, I just know he didn't win, right? Um,
Right.
and there's just a multitude of shooters that you can have two matches back to back, and hardly the same guy will win twice. You know what I mean?
It's usually the same 20 guys, one of them.
Right.
But yes, you're right. It's difficult. I mean, I remember when David Bailey won the Nationals. What was that? Was that 2012?
I'm
Yeah, I
not
think it
sure, but
was
I remember he won.
2012. He shot a 280 Remington, which is pretty unlikely, but he did. He didn't win a single match,
He
but he
just
shot he shot quite well in all matches.
he just
He
stayed
didn't have any
consistent.
train wrecks, didn't have any disasters,
Right.
and he won the Nationals without
Right.
winning a single match.
Right. Yeah, it's a long race, right? It's a
Yep.
it's a you just have to stay consistent, which is hard to do.
So after Raton, I came back to San Diego, and we had a local event which is held annually. It's called Pendleton mid-range mash, mid-range regional, and a 600-yard match. It's 6, 3 each day, so it's a 1,200-point match. And I wanted to shoot it, but I didn't have anything loaded for my 6BR or even the Shaheen. But I did have enough ammo left over from Raton. I'd loaded 650 rounds.
Mm-hmm.
I had enough ammo left over to shoot the regional with the 300.
Mm-hmm.
So I went out to Pendleton, and Gary Alicio was there, and Randy Tesidra, who's a very fine California sling shooter. And they said, "What are you shooting?" And I said, "Well, I brought my 300. Oh, no, that's too big. That's way too big for mid-range." And I said, "Well, what's the problem?" "Well, no, you should have brought your 6BR, blah, blah, blah." And I said, "Well, it's actually shooting pretty well." "Well, it's just too much gun for mid-range." I said, "Well, okay."
Mm-hmm.
So we started shooting, and it was doing very well, except what happened at some point was that I was shooting so many X's, I was digging a deep hole in the backstop because they kept hitting in the same place. And the target puller couldn't see the hit. It just kept going into the same hole.
Right.
And I'd have to have him phone down to the pits and say, "Look at the target," and he'd pull it down and he'd mark it and put it back up. And it's pretty disruptive, very, very irritating. And the third match each day was, we had a steady 16-mile-an-hour crosswind from the left. Pretty vicious. I mean, at one point I had 4 minutes on the scope at 600 yards with a 300 WSM. I have no idea what the TR guys were doing. Whether they had 10 minutes on their gun or what, I don't know. But I shot the high score for the match, and my X count was much higher than Gary Alicio, who was the next highest scorer. But of course, Gary was shooting sling, and the match director at that time was a sling bigot. He considered F class to be an inferior species, and he declared Gary the winner of the regional because, well, F class just doesn't count.
Ah, well, that's interesting.
Yes, that's not unknown. I've encountered it before. Yeah, at one point over in Phoenix, Mid Tompkins used to be a bit annoying about the sling shooters versus F class. Of course, then he and Nancy actually started shooting F class.
Right. So,
but, yeah,
that would be today, as you know, in today's climate, would be known as sling shooter privilege.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, a little trick Mid used to do in Phoenix was that they have that 14-foot berm over there on the right, on the east side of the range, and the prevailing wind in Phoenix is usually from the east. And he'd squat all the sling shooter or all the F-class shooters down on that end, close to the east berm, where there's a lot of turbulence coming over that berm. And boy, you'd get unexpected vertical, especially on the low numbers, say 1 to 10. And all the sling shooters would be squatted way over on the left-hand side where they just had clear air, and that was pretty annoying. But we've come to expect it. So
yeah. So you own 2 grizzly bears, right?
I do.
So in California, when you win, they give you a grizzly bear, correct?
Yep,
This is the
you get
long
a
range.
bear.
This is the long
Yep,
range state championship.
yes.
Did you win them both with the 300?
No, Shaheen in 2012 and the 300 in 2013.
So back to back. Um, the 300. I interviewed Will McCloskey, and he talked about the because Will brought the Dasher, right?
Sure.
The Dasher has long been a very popular and for good reason, very accurate, precise
Yep.
cartridge for mid range. But you just can't you just can't 1,000 yards, those extra 400 yards make a huge difference on that small bullet, right?
Oh yeah.
Uh,
Sure.
I know Will tried it. Um Brian Bowling had a similar cartridge that he was deadly at 600. You did not want to go up against Brian Bowling with this. I think he called it TAC 40 or something. It's essentially a dasher.
Hmm.
And then he tried it at long range for a while, and he finally came to the conclusion that it's hard to beat the bigger guns.
Yeah.
So Will, if I understand it correctly, it was quite mild on day one, the conditions.
It was quite reasonable. I mean, as you might expect, the third match, the wind came up a little bit, but it was quite a reasonable day.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we were close. I beat Will on X's that day, a fair number. I think by 10. I think it was 10 X's.
And that's kind of the point that uh, it's hard to beat a dasher on X's. You know what I mean? And the 300 had no issue. I remember clearly. That's when I kind of started really thinking about the 300, because if you can out X a dasher on mild conditions, that's a good shooting cartridge. You know what I mean?
Well, when I was doing load development on the shortcut load, I was shooting 5-shot groups of 100 in the ones,
Wow.
Point 0.1 to 0.18, 5-shot groups. I mean, it was just phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it had a huge window, about 0.8 grains where nothing changed.
Wow.
The velocity didn't change more than about 10 feet per second. The ES stayed the same. The grouping stayed the same. It was actually remarkable.
What about so day one was quite mild, if I remember. You only dropped like 4 or 5 points, didn't you? If
Yeah,
I
we both did. He shot very well that day. I just beat him on X's.
mm-hmm.
I think that was primarily because of the third match, when we had a little bit of wind.
Mm-hmm.
But the next day, Sunday, it it was a bit frisky.
Mm-hmm.
We had a bit of wind on the range, and yeah, it wasn't much of a contest.
Yeah, once that wind kicks up, those dashers are hard. Those any 6 millimeter, even the six
Yeah,
fives, are hard to
yep.
keep up with the sevens. And of course, you had that. So, Will said after that he built a WSM.
Hmm.
He just couldn't. He just couldn't. And I think he's still to this day is trying to beat you. But of course, you are no longer shooting.
Yeah. At that same time, what had happened was, you remember I had a big dog. I had a mastiff,
Right.
and he was diagnosed with a degenerative neurological disorder, very similar to ALS in humans.
Mm-hmm.
And my
Wow.
younger daughter had moved out of the house, and so there was nobody. And Bart needed a full-time attention. He was
Mm-hmm.
prone to seizures, and he had some problems. So there was just nobody to take care of him. And I just said, well, I continued to shoot in local matches into 2015. But yeah, I wasn't going anywhere. I wasn't traveling anywhere because of that.
Yeah, when did you stop shooting? Because you were on our team, uh, on our
Hmm.
team Lapua, uh, which is a whole nother conversation. Because y- you were there at the beginning, and you know where it's at now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Oh,
it's
we had a lot of fun.
uh, but it was about the 2014, 15 when
15, well, 14, I stopped traveling, and 15, late in 15, I shot my last local match.
okay, uh, yeah, I remember Bart got sick, but you pretty much gave it up since then.
Yeah, I had an opportunity to go to work at the UC San Diego Supercomputer Center,
Mm-hmm.
and this is what I wanted to do all along.
Okay.
I wanted to work on very complex systems and solve problems. And unlike at GA, they were perfectly happy to let me not work on any Windows systems, which is certainly to my liking. Um, I'm an old Unix guy, and I just I'm like a lazy housemaid. I don't do Windows. Yeah, so yeah, that's where I've been since. I'm still there,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, I'm certainly old enough to retire, um, but they've twice asked me to stay on, um, and I enjoy what I'm doing. They pay me quite well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, as you know, we've been at home for the last 2.5 years, and we're not going to go back.
Mm-hmm.
Even my boss doesn't want to go back. So we're continuing to work remotely, flexible schedule, get your work done, and nobody cares about the hours,
Right.
when you work.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's what I always wanted to do.
Good.
But having said that, I've just spent a bit of money on some bullets and components, and I'll start shooting the local
Oh,
300-yard match again with my 6BR, and look forward to shooting some long range matches.
so we're gonna see you back on the big stage like nationals at Burger. Is that in
I
the horizon or
that No, that's what I intend to do.
good?
It won't be much longer till I retire. Hell, I mean, I'll be 70 next year. It isn't like I'm not at the right time.
Wow.
But um, and as you know, when I do retire, I'm leaving California. I don't think anybody needs an explanation of why. Uh, I mean, the weather's beautiful. This is San Diego. You don't get any better,
Mm-hmm.
but the political climate leaves much to be desired.
Yeah, that's what I hear.
Yeah.
But so man, that's some good news. I'm glad to hear that you're that itch is coming back. The you know.
Well, as you know, I mean, I never really lost it. I've stayed active on Accurate Shooter.
Mm-hmm.
I've paid attention to what people are doing. I will say the scores I've seen are pretty impressive. Obviously, people have continued to advance the state of the art in the sport. Um, I still think my old bats are competitive. I don't think
Yeah, you'll be
that's a
fine.
problem.
Equipment wise, especially. I mean, here's the thing: you were ahead of your time back then, right? Like now, people are advancing. That means they're shooting 300s. Well, you already have one. You started with it. Um, uh, some of the things that you're probably not very familiar with is electronic targets, which some of these
Right.
matches are moving towards. Uh, hey, maybe you get enough points and go to the V2 finale where you get to pair fire, which is
Right.
a whole nother format, uh, head-to-head competition. Great, great, great match. But
Hmm.
I think you're gonna hit your stride pretty quick. You just it's just one of those things, right? Where back then, what was the record when you quit shooting? About 217 or something, or
No,
15?
I think somebody actually shot 20.
No, there was no. It was 13, 15, 17, and then Norm 22. So there was
Okay. So it must have been, was that David that shot
David
17?
David shot
Yeah.
17.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
So of course now it's 22 X's,
Right. Right.
and you know since that nobody obviously could beat 17, and ever since Norm shot 22, there's been multiple 18s, 19s, uh,
Hmm.
becoming pretty common nowadays.
Right.
It's strange how once that bar is moved, everybody else just kind of follows
Sure.
suit.
Yep.
So
Oddly enough, I still hold the range record at 1,000 for F class at Camp Pendleton. Um, that's only 11, 211X.
wow.
But that's on range 117, which you've probably heard me talk about before. The headwind range that faces south southwest. It's everything is wrong about the range. Um, that's the sniper range at Pendleton,
Okay.
and yeah, that's where I learned to shoot headwinds.
Wow.
Yeah, when I encounter a headwind, I just rub my hands together because
You feel at home.
yeah, this is all I ever did at Pendleton. So
Wow. Wow. That's a headwinds, or obviously tailwinds, are very tricky.
hmm.
Uh, um, when I used to teach classes, I would tell people, like the when you're learning how to read wind, the first thing you need to learn, keep it simple, but the first thing you need to know is whether it's coming from the left or the right. And some people would say, Eric, that's a waste of time. Why would I waste my time? I mean, that's the easiest thing to figure out. I said, not if you encounter a headwind.
Right. Yeah.
It's very hard to tell whether it's right or left,
Yeah.
uh, because you just and that's the thing about headwinds. They don't, well, unless they're very drastic. You don't hit them, but you don't hit a lot of eights, but you will hit a lot of nines and
That's right.
just liners. It'll just nine ring
Yep.
you to death, and it's just frustrating.
That's right.
Very frustrating.
Yep. Yep.
So, I have another question for you. Sleepy Gator, where does that come from? Because those that have followed you on, or have I met you on Accurate Shooter, and when we finally met on person, I didn't know you were Sleepy Gator until you actually gave me some of your reduced targets, and it said Sleepy Gator there at the bottom, and that's when I kind
Was,
of put two and two together.
was that 2009 when we shot
10,
the
10,
10, the Palma over in Phoenix? Yeah.
2010. Yes, sir.
Okay. Um, so when I joined the Navy, I was from Florida. Yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
grew up on the Florida Gulf Coast,
Uh huh.
and so they called me Gator.
Okay.
So I have a relatively mild form of narcolepsy.
Okay.
It occasionally causes problems. I've actually had to pull over on the road and simply go to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so they found it highly amusing that in almost any condition at sea, I could just put my head back and go to sleep. They thought that was just a riot. Times when other people couldn't sleep at all. It was hot and humid, whatever the problem was, and I'd just go to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
So then they called me Sleepy Gator.
Ah. That's where that comes from.
Yeah. And in reality, I'm not sleepy. I mean, I'm most of the time I'm alert, but when this condition occurs, there's not a lot I can do about it.
Just go to sleep.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but that's the way it is.
Oh, I don't know. I think I'm the other way. I have some insomnia sometimes, and I wish I had a little bit of that because sometimes I just can't sleep, even though I want to. Well,
Yeah, no,
Steve,
going to sleep has never been the problem.
this has been great. I think we're gonna have to do it again because there's so much we didn't cover. Like you are a big reason for Easy Tuner. My tuners. You were a huge
Ah,
help when that thing was developed, and remember I was trying to keep it a secret, and when of
yep,
course it was when you won your Texas or not Texas but your California championships
yes,
that Paul did a article and he zoomed in on that tuner and
yep.
that's where it started. People started asking for tuners and still doing tuners.
Well, you can tune a load, and if you're lucky, as you know, everything falls into place and the harmonics are right, everything works, and you can get a very small group. That's
Mm-hmm.
great, but that's not always true.
Right.
And once you sort everything else out, you've got your powder and primer, the load, you've got the seating depth correct, and you've tuned it as well as you can. And then you dial in the tuner. That's when, for instance, my 300 started producing groups in the ones. And that's the first rifle I've ever had. Even the 6BR, which doesn't have a tuner on it, wouldn't group like that
Mm-hmm.
consistently.
Right. Yeah,
And
that's the key word.
I mean, you've seen that 300 shoot at long range. It's just it's amazing. A very very accurate rifle.
Right.
Um, I won the After I won the California State Championship. I won the 29 Palms Long Range Regional up at the Marine Corps base at 29 Palms.
Mm-hmm.
I won that 3 years in a row, twice with the Shaheen and once with the 300.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and That's another range that is not much fun. I don't know what it is about the Marines and their range building, but that was a terrible range. I mean, it was good. It was a beautifully constructed range. The firing points and everything were highly professional, but it was across a valley. And so you shot from one side of the valley to the other. And the 600-yard line was a berm about 30 feet tall in the middle of the valley. So you had to shoot across that berm,
Mm-hmm.
and it was almost always a tailwind. So if you did not pay very close attention to the pickups and let-offs, that 600-yard berm would bounce you up or down into the
Mm-hmm.
9 ring. The
Not
vertical
fun.
was terrible,
Yeah.
but yeah, but the 300 again did things on that range that the Shaheen would not have.
Well, yeah, because the higher ballistics also when it just gets pushed around less, right? Whether it be
Yep,
left, right, up, or down. So
yep.
that's just simple.
And as you know, I mean, if it saves you 1 point in a big tournament, that 1 point is, it may not seem like much, but that might be 10 or 11 places on.
Oh, it's drastic, especially if your X count is high.
Yep.
You always want to have the highest X count, which I typically do or try to do at matches because even if you're tied with a lot of people, I always say that X's count for 1 point because if you have the highest X count, they need one more point than you to beat you.
That's
You know what
right.
I mean?
Yep.
Uh, I there was a point in time when I stopped believing in X's and I figured I would just shoot tens. And if I shoot tens, nobody would beat me. And in 2010 at the Palmer Championship, after 3 days of shooting, somebody beat me by 1x because I was
Hmm.
only shooting tens. And that day, I said, no more. I'm
That's
gonna
right.
shoot X's. And that was a pretty defining moment where I decided I'm gonna shoot X's and I'm gonna learn how to shoot X's. And it's a whole different mentality when you decide you're an X shooter versus you're a 10 shooter. It changes everything. And I went on a journey to shoot X's from there on.
Well, I came to the same conclusion, and the way I did it was that I got my 6BR out of the safe, and I started shooting these 300-yard matches here in San Diego. And once a year, they have a match where it is solely decided by X count,
Hmm.
just the number of X's at 300.
Mm-hmm.
And then they also have a trophy called the Mr. Clean Trophy, where if you shoot, three cleans in the match at 300, your name goes on the trophy. I think I've been on that 5 times. Um,
Wow.
and I started shooting the 6BR and concentrating on shooting X's. And it made a difference. I started seeing some things I was doing that, that last increment of precision when you're aiming and making your wind call. I, as you said, I was really shooting for tens. I wasn't really trying to keep it in the X ring.
Right.
And I started pushing it just a little bit harder and trying to shoot that X. And it paid off. My X count definitely went up.
Right. It does. It goes up, and once you become that person, it just becomes who you are, and you just like people ask me nowadays, how do you shoot so many X's? I don't know. That's just, but it has to be in the style of shooting. You know what I mean? And because
Hmm.
I know I developed it, but I don't remember. Like I don't actively think gotta shoot X's. I think it's just in a way to making minor corrections. Just gotta get
Yep.
that X, gotta get that X. And a lot of people, as long as they're in the 10 ring, they don't do anything up or down, left or right, which
Right.
is, you gotta center that group. Uh,
Yep.
but anyway, just
Do
gotta shoot
you do
those
you
X's.
remember your last shot at Raton in 2013?
No,
I was coaching you.
for the team match.
Yeah, in the team match.
Yeah, I don't remember. You know, uh, y- it's just one of those sad things that I remember when my load went to heck because I left the ammo.
Sure.
I was shooting at 78-28, left my ammo out in the heat, and
Right.
it went from this to
Oh yeah. Yeah.
horrendous. But anyway, go ahead.
We were shooting along, and you had coached the rest of us, and so we were kind of collaborating on the wind calls. It wasn't really me just telling you. We had sometimes had a short discussion
Hmm.
about it. And on the last shot, I noticed that you'd been climbing up a little bit, and that the guys next to us had been shooting high.
Hmm.
And so just before you shot, I said, hold a little low.
Hmm.
And you shot a 5 right at the top. It was absolutely 12 o'clock. I mean, the wind call was perfect,
Uh-huh.
but you held down just a little bit and caught that 5.
Yeah,
And yeah, and we just yeah, that was great. That was a good way to finish the string.
that was we ended up fourth
Yeah.
at the world championship,
Yep.
which is not bad. Uh,
No, no, no,
but
no.
I think if my calculations were correct, we would have been second had my gun not went to heck.
Yeah.
Of course, could have, would have, should have, right?
Yeah, that's yeah.
uh, the who was on that? It was you, me. Was it Larry Tate? Larry Tate was
Yes, Larry.
And
And
the photographer, Danny, what was his name? From New
from
Mexico.
New Mexico, he maybe
Yeah, it was
it
him. It was him.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, man, that
Um,
was I want to say his name was Danny.
Denny, I think.
Yeah, he was. I liked him a lot.
Yeah.
He I remember he had a hammer of a gun. Uh,
Hmm.
but I don't think he realized it, and it wasn't until he got into team mode where he was just shooting and I was just coaching. I mean, he was
Right.
putting up some monster scores. I think he was.
Yep.
If I remember correctly, by the time we moved back to 1,000, he was clean with like 26 X's or
Hmm.
V's. I mean, he was
Right.
really, really that gun. That was a good gun. And of course, we had Larry Tate with us. I mean, we gave it hell, man. That was a that was a good
You
match.
know, the first time we shot together, we had that pickup team. Don Nagel coached us. There
Yeah,
was
so it was that's right. It was Don
that
Nagel,
was Jay Cutright,
right?
you, me, and oh, damn it, he's gone now.
Tony
Also,
Robertson.
Tony Robertson,
Hmm.
yeah, and of course Don's gone too, sadly.
Right.
Um, and we it was just a pickup team, and didn't we finish second?
I don't remember.
I think so.
I don't have your memory.
Well, Don was coaching us, and
Right.
he came over. He switched over to my side, and I was shooting my Shaheen. And at that time, for some reason, I had a Krieger barrel that was unusually fast.
Mm-hmm.
It had tuned at 2965
Wow. That's
with
fast.
shortcut instead of 2940.
Uh-huh.
And everything else after that, Brooks, Krieger, whatever, always 2940.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's just where they tuned.
Mm-hmm.
So I laid down there and was waiting. He switched over to me and he says, "Okay, what are you shooting?" And I said, "Shaheen with 180s." And he said, "What muzzle velocity?" And I said, 2965. Whoa, that's way too high. And I said, "Well, no, it's not. It's just a fast barrel." Well, okay, fine. And we started shooting, and that was at 800. Yeah, I think that was at 800. And I shot a 150 with 14 X's
Wow.
at 1800. And he was just dumbfounded. He said, "That thing's a hammer." And I said, "Well, you were telling me where to point it."
Makes it easier.
Yeah. Um, but that was the first time I'd ever shot a team match, and that was great. I thought
Oh,
that was wonderful.
yeah. That's kind of the beginnings of the team matches. Of course, now we have 7 members on the team, and Todd Hendricks added it up the other day. We have 9 national championships uh, on the team, and the members of the team combined, we have 11 national championships. So we have a total of 20 national championships. It's who to thunk it. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yep.
And you were there when it all started, man. It was we just like, hey, we got to shoot team, and we did.
Yeah. And Don said, "Yeah, I'll coach." And
Yeah.
yeah, it was at that match that somebody asked Don about reloading. This was after the match when we were bullshitting. Somebody asked Don about reloading, and he came up with the best response I think I've ever heard. He said, "There's about 20 things I do when I'm reloading. I think only 10 are necessary, but I don't know which 10."
That's very true. That is very true.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's impressive, and I mean we're only talking what I don't know 9, 10 years ago, right?
Yeah. Yep.
It's just but it's the sport has moved quite
Oh,
fast.
yeah. Now that seems like medieval times now. I mean, we
Yeah.
were just I mean, the rifles were shooting well, but there was no, the 6.5 284 was still a factor at that time.
Right.
The 284 and the Shaheen were only just starting to come into their own.
Hmm.
Um, you were well ahead of the curve on that one because you'd been shooting the Shaheen for a while when we met,
Right.
and that was to me when I saw the performance, I said, well, that's the obvious choice
Hmm.
because ballistically at that time I had not seen anything better.
Right. The 284s were coming onto the scene, and I had actually reached out and spoke to Bill Shahane because he was a prominent venture shooter,
Yep.
and he had developed this 284 Shahane. And I like the fact that it was an improved cartridge, but very little was done to it. But the
Hmm.
performance gains were what I would consider massive. You know, uh,
So you can get what about 2880 with shortcut in the 284.
most of
Um,
them were running about 2820 to 2850. So
but that's with 4350, right?
yeah, I mean, it was a good 75 to 100 feet per second. You know,
Yeah, most guys run that 2820, 2840 node with 4350, and it obviously works. I mean, I'm not gonna denigrate the 284 because it has won too many matches and beaten me too many times to put down.
right?
I mean, there was that one time at the Arizona Long Range when it was right after I'd won the California Championship the second time, and I was shooting the 300, and I shot what was it? A 990 with, I think, 50 X's. Is that right? Yes, a 990 with 50 X's,
So
which
50%
is
exit. Yeah, that's
that's
pretty good.
that's a credible score, and the conditions were not ideal
Right.
during that tournament. David Gosnell shot a 995 with something like 55 X's. It was a range record. So, I mean, it should have been a winning score, but
It
David
wasn't.
had a better one. And
Yeah.
he did it. He did it, of course, with a straight 284.
Right. Right. Yeah. That those 284s, you can't
No,
deny them. They're very good. They're very consistent, and they're easy to shoot. I think it comes down to being easy to shoot, and the ballistics are there. There's
right.
enough ballistics that, and the fact that they afford you the opportunity to shoot fast,
Oh,
take
yeah.
take advantage of conditions. Uh, but when it's really, you know, Brian Blake, if he's watching this, I'm gonna give him credit for this. There you go, Brian. He has been pointing out the fact that the V2 finale, that in pair fire, magnums have an advantage because there's no string fire, right? You can't the
Yep.
speed at which you can shoot a smaller cartridge does not help you.
It's
It's
irrelevant. Yeah.
it's pure wind calling, and when it comes down to pure wind calling, you're gonna make more errors. Therefore, the magnums, which drift less, are gonna allow you to catch more fives or 10 rings, which I think has some merit because we've had this match 2 years in a row or 2 years so far, and they've both been won by magnums. Not only have they been won by magnums, is the magnums typically end up, you know, 2 years in a row the magnum has won it, and this year first and second were magnums. You know what I mean? Um,
Hmm.
so I think there's some merit to that, to and of course the world championships are pair fire.
Right.
So, um,
Well, about halfway through my F class shooting journey, I made the decision that I didn't like I didn't like the rapid fire condition shooting. Waiting for a condition and then banging off as many as you could until you hit a nine. I didn't like it.
right.
Well, I worked on making wind calls on every shot. I used to go out to South Bay Rod and Gun Club and shoot at 300 yards with my 6BR, and I'd go out there after lunch.
Mm,
And that's in the foothills of our local mountains. And when it heats up out there after lunch, the wind is just terrible. And so that's what I did. I worked on making a wind call on every single shot.
mm-hmm.
And a few times, like in Phoenix, one time when um, I had a dead cartridge. It misfired. It wouldn't fire,
Mm-hmm.
and I had the cheek piece up on my Manners stock, and Michelle was scoring for me, and I couldn't get the bolt out because the cheek piece was up.
Right.
And in order to lower it, you needed a hex key.
Mm-hmm.
That was in the truck. So I told Michelle, I said, I can't get the bolt out. I got to go to my truck and get a hex key. And she looked at me like, well, okay, do what you think.
Right.
So I ran off, got the hex key, came back, took the cheek piece off, got the bolt out, and then just laid down and finished the string. But when I looked at the conditions, I looked at it, I looked at the flags, I looked at the Mirage, and I said, this looks exactly the same as when I left. So I held the same and I shot next. And Michelle told me after the match, she said, that was really impressive that you came back from, having to run to your truck and all and still shot max. And I said, well, actually it was just, the condition was just exactly the same. So it wasn't all that, remarkable. But another thing came out of that event that changed my shooting quite a bit too. I realized after I'd finished the string that I'd not put the cheek piece back. It was off the rifle.
Mm-hmm.
So clearly I wasn't using it. And at that point, I just said, okay, screw this. And I just put the cheek piece down, locked it in place, and I've never used it again.
Wow. Well, nowadays they have stocks that are, I guess I call them
Right.
sway back, so that you don't ever
Yep.
touch I actually use my cheek rest, but it's just have to develop your own style,
Yeah.
be consistent, and work on wind reading, because that's
Yes.
ultimately. But if you can't shoot small groups, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter uh how good your rifle or how good of a wind reader you are if your rifle doesn't shoot.
Well, guys used to ask me, what's the one thing that you do that, is the biggest help? And well, there is no one thing. It's a whole bunch of little things and it's cumulative.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, but what's the one thing? They all want the magic
Oh
beans
yeah, of course.
that's going to make the beanstalk grow. And no, it doesn't work like that. And as you know, I've told a lot of people my load development methodology. I've told them how I shoot and so on. Well, yeah, I really like this and this and this, but that doesn't seem very important, and this seems like too much trouble. And well, you do as you wish.
Right.
I'm just telling you what works for me. It might not work for you, but they're always looking for the easy path. There's got to be a quick, cheap way to get there. And the bottom line is there is not a quick, cheap way to get there.
Right. Yeah, you just have, it's a system, right? Everything has to work. And I mean, it's come down to, I mean, any number of things. I mean, you may not feel well that day, and
That's right.
everything can be working perfect, but if you don't feel well, you whatever, you're just not going to shoot well. You have to be 100% there, mentally, physically, and the equipment. And not only the thing about the nationals, right? Not only that day, you got to string 3 days together where
Yes.
everything's working well.
And of course we were pulling.
Yeah. You gotta
And
go to the pits.
and just like you, when I'm in the pits, I pull hard.
Oh yeah.
I do my damnedest to give the best possible pit service I can.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
And it's, it's exercise. By the end of
It's
the day, you're tired.
yeah. It's part of being a good competitor. You give good service. You shoot well. You carry yourself well. It's just all about it. And well,
Yep.
if shooting well is just icing on the cake.
Yeah. Well, it's the end result of a very large number of little things.
Right. Right. Uh, yeah. I mean, John Gaines. That name just popped up in my head.
Ah, yes. Yeah, that was
Mr. John Gaines.
in fact what he did, he turned to you after I shot those last six. As I said, I shot them as fast as I could pull the trigger. I mean, the target would come up and stop, and the gun would go off as the target was stopping. And he turned to you. You were getting up and starting to pick up your stuff. He turned to you and he said, "Well, that was effing impressive."
Yeah, oh John Gaines, man. I miss him. He was always fun to talk to.
In fact, there was a guy down in Florida, a dentist that I had helped with his Shaheen. We'd had a number of conversations. He'd been having problems with his Shaheen, and he asked me on Accurate Shooter if I would talk to him. So we had a few conversations, and he ended up getting his Shaheen shooting well. He won some matches down there in Florida, and he thanked me quite sincerely. He was very grateful for that help. After we shot that match, he came up to me afterwards and he said, "I think I won that match." And I said, "What did you shoot?" And he said, "I shot a 150 11X." And I said, "Well, I shot a 150 11X too." I said, "What was your last shot?" And he said, "It was a 10. I grabbed him by the shoulder and I said, "Good shooting, man."
Let me guess, you have shot an X.
Well, my last six shots were 6Xs in a string. So I was pretty confident that I was going to Creedmoor anybody with 11Xs.
Yeah. So the Creedmoor rule, they go back uh and they work. Explain the
Yeah.
Creedmoor rule.
So you go backwards from the last shot. If it's a tie, you go backwards until someone has a higher score.
Yeah. So you had an X, he had a 10, you win.
It's done, right? But since shots 10 through 15 were all X's, the chances of him beating me on a Creedmoor were
Yeah.
about zero.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. Oh man, I love beating people. I love Creedmooring people. Uh it's fun because but it kind of sucks when you get Creedmoored because
Oh yeah,
it's a
no,
great score, but somebody shot the same one. They just so happened that they shot better towards the end, and
yeah.
I don't know where that rule comes from, but
Well,
whatever.
it was the old Creedmoor Range on Long Island where the U.S. Irish Championships were shot, and that was a rule that was invented there.
Right.
It's the shot that you shot last. Your most
I
recent
think
shot.
it goes beyond that though. That's the one that gets used the most. But I believe the first criteria is who shot the lowest shot. For example, you and I have the exact same, let's say 148.11, right? And you have a 148.11, but I shot an 8 and you shot two nines, you win. That's the first
Oh, is that
criteria.
right? Okay, I wasn't aware of that one. I
Yeah.
thought it was
So that's the first one, right? Because the guy that shot the 8 loses compared to the guy that shot two nines. If obviously in a clean, there's no such thing, right? Well, that one.
right.
So then you work backwards.
Yeah,
So
it's with a clean, it's either a 10 or an X. So yeah.
correct, and then you just work your way back. But anyway, it's an interesting rule. It gets applied more often now than before because of how tight the
Right.
scores are. But Uh, it's always fun to create more somebody else.
Well, these days I see some of these 1,000-yard matches when they're shooting in nice conditions. The scores almost look like mid-range matches.
I went to a Bayou. I haven't been shooting club matches much lately, but I decided to go back to Bayou and shoot some club matches. Because World Championships coming up. So I said, I better get back into the game. And I shot at 1,000 yards. I shot a 994 42 X's. I lost by 3 points. that was only good enough for third place.
Yeah,
I was like, all right, game
yeah,
on.
yeah.
And the next month I went back and I shot at 993. And I got second place. I only got beat by 1 point. So I mean I'm staying consistent, but oh man, these guys they're good, which is what I like to see because otherwise I would have been real happy with a 994. Well, now that tells me got to push more. You know what I mean? Which is gotta get the gun a little bit better.
If you look at the score distribution in FTR and F Open, um, there's a group of shooters at the top of FTR that shoot very, very consistently, and often their scores are not that far behind Open.
Right.
But there's more disparity in FTR.
Right.
It's spread out a little bit more. That 1 point is not likely to put you in 18th place.
Right.
Whereas in Open, it's just cutthroat.
Oh yeah, you shoot a 9 or an 8. Oh, you shoot an 8.
Yeah,
Ooh, those hurt because well, 2 points is major disaster. And but if you shoot an 8, you just have to maintain, your mental fortitude and go, well, if I'm shooting an 8, I'm sure there's others doing the same. So just shoot your match and worry about it after the fact.
we shot a match in Phoenix. I think it was the Burger Nationals. On Saturday, there was a terrible relay.
Oh, I don't want
It
to
was
talk about that one.
it was really horrible. It was actually, I think, the worst conditions in which I've ever shot. Um, I know at Pendleton they would have called the match.
I think this
Be-
was 2012 or 13. And I remember it well because it was leading up to the World Championship, so it may have been 2013. Um, and I was leading that match up until that relay.
Yes, we both dropped 18 points in one relay.
But I got you on Nexus.
But the next morning, I mean, to show you how much things can change, the next morning I went out there and it was cool and clear. A front had gone through. It was cool and clear. The Mirage had this glassy liquid quality about it,
Hmm.
and it was like somebody was flashing holds up on the target. It was so easy to read. And I shot a 199 on the first match and a 199 on the second match and took the ag for the day. Now with 18 points the day before, it didn't make any difference. I mean, it did push me a little bit up the leaderboard, but
Right.
you know, but it just goes to show that on Saturday I couldn't hit the damn 10 ring for anything. On Sunday, I could hardly
Miss.
get out of it.
Yeah, it's impressive and it's funny how that happens. I remember you discussing or explaining to me what you saw that day because obviously nobody else saw it because you won for the day. I think Richard King was scoring for you that day, and it's like, what were you doing? And you're like,
Yeah,
oh, it was easy. Just comes from the left, hold left, it goes in the center, no big deal, right? But obviously nobody else saw what you saw, which is what makes this sport very interesting. You can be right next to somebody and you can be shooting your best score ever, and somebody next to you is struggling, and you guys are just seeing different things. Whatever you found that day,
Yeah.
and to this day you describe it as somebody flashing holes on the target. Well,
Yeah. No, it was amazing. It was easily the most readable mirage I had ever seen.
yeah, that's impressive. Uh, I remember once I dropped those 18 points, I got up and I immediately went looking for you, and I found out that you were walking towards me,
Yeah.
and I think we both said to each other, "You're not gonna believe what just happened," and of course, we both revealed that we had dropped 18 points each. To which I asked, "How many X's?" And you said two, and I said, "I got three," and that was my little win.
Yeah.
Um, well, I'll tell you what, that was my worst stage or match ever
Yeah. Yeah.
until until yeah. Uh,
Really.
it had to be Nationals 2019 or 2020 in Raton. I think I dropped 23 points. And I was like, yes, only 23. It was bad. I mean, it was bad. So 18 is not my worst. It had been for about 5 or 6 years until Raton. And then it was bad.
You remember that young man, a boy really at the time, Ryan something. He shot with us up at Raton.
Pierce, Ryan Pierce?
No, 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 not Ryan Pierce. He was a boy. His parents were there with
Oh,
him.
Reese Ireland?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's it.
Yeah.
Reese.
Yeah.
So I he scored for me. I shot, and it was a fairly stiff relay up there at Raton, and I think I dropped 8 points. And then he shot the next string, and I scored for him, and he dropped like 16 points. And he was the poor kid. I mean, he looked like he was about ready to cry. And I told him, I said, the guy that was shooting next to me was a two-time national champion and dropped 14 points. I said, you have nothing to be ashamed of.
Yeah.
I said, you did what you could in the conditions. Just keep going for it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
as I was taking my gear away from the line, his dad stopped me and he said, thanks for saying that. I said, it's the truth. I said,
Reese went on to be very, 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 very good. He won
yeah,
the Canadian Nationals in 2017. The which is probably the hardest Canadian Nationals there has ever been to win, because that's right before the World Championship. So pretty much
right,
it's like winning a World Championship, because everybody's there. The same
sure,
people that shooting the World Championship shot the Nationals, and
right,
Reese won. So that's a major accomplishment.
yeah. No, he was a great kid. He knew what he was doing. He paid attention. It's just I think that you know dropping that many points kind of gutted him, but yeah,
Yeah,
it does to everybody.
so it gets us all.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, Steve, I appreciate you doing this. I know you're a busy guy, and
Yep.
I look forward to seeing you on the line.
All right.
All right,
I'll
Steve.
see. All right, Eric.
Thank you. Take
Right.
care. Bye bye.
Bye.